Welcome to WWII Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. The year is 1933. Germany is in turmoil. The Nazi Party, with its charismatic and dangerous leader, rises to power, casting a shadow that will soon engulf Europe. Within this new Reich, the Christian churches face a perilous choice. For centuries, they have been pillars of German society, their steeples defining the skyline and their teachings shaping the moral landscape. But now, they must contend with a totalitarian ideology that demands absolute loyalty, an ideology that views religion as a rival for the soul of the nation. The relationship is fraught from the start. In July 1933, the Vatican signs the Reichskonkordat, an agreement with Nazi Germany intended to protect the rights of the Catholic Church. On the surface, it appears to be a diplomatic victory, a way to carve out a space for worship in an increasingly hostile state. But in reality, it lends legitimacy to Hitler's regime and encourages a posture of non-interference among many church leaders. The majority of German clergy, both Catholic and Protestant, adopt a stance ranging from cautious neutrality to outright support. Some are swayed by the Nazis' appeal to national pride and anti-communism. Others are intimidated by the regime's brutality, witnessing the swift and merciless suppression of any political opposition. The result is a deafening silence from the pulpits as the state begins its systematic persecution of the Jewish people. Parish registers, meticulously kept for generations, are handed over to Nazi officials. These records, containing detailed genealogies, become a terrible weapon, used to identify and target individuals with Jewish ancestry. The Church, an institution meant to be a moral compass, becomes, in many cases, a passive accomplice in an unfolding atrocity. This atmosphere of widespread complicity and fear is the backdrop against which our story unfolds. It is a world where speaking out is an act of treason, and defiance is a death sentence. Yet, within this landscape of moral compromise, a few lone figures will make a different choice. They will decide that their faith demands more than silence, that their humanity compels them to act. They are a small, scattered minority, operating without the sanction of their superiors, often in direct violation of the Church's cautious policies. Their actions will not change the course of the war, but they will save thousands of lives and provide a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of absolute evil. This is the story of those who turned their churches into sanctuaries and their faith into a shield. November 9th, 1938. The cold autumn air across Germany crackles with menace. Under the cloak of darkness, a meticulously organized pogrom is unleashed. It will be called Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. All night, the sounds of shattering windows, splintering wood, and hateful screams echo through the streets. Synagogues, symbols of a vibrant culture, are set ablaze, their sacred scrolls desecrated. Jewish-owned businesses are looted, homes are ransacked, and thousands of Jewish men are rounded up and sent to concentration camps. The morning reveals a scene of devastation. The streets are littered with glass, the air thick with the smoke of smoldering ruins. For Germany's Jews, it is a terrifying escalation, a clear signal that they are no longer safe in their own country. For the rest of the world, it is a shocking display of the Nazi regime's barbarity. And for a select few within the German clergy, it is a moment of profound moral reckoning. The official response from the church leadership is muted, a continuation of the policy of cautious accommodation. But for some individual priests, the sight of their neighbors being brutalized and their places of worship being destroyed is an unbearable affront to their conscience. The violence of Kristallnacht shatters any remaining illusions about the nature of the Nazi regime. It is no longer possible to look away, to rationalize, to remain silent. In Berlin, the dean of St. Hedwig's Cathedral, a man named Bernhard Lichtenberg, witnesses the horror firsthand. The burning synagogue near his church is a visceral, personal affront. He feels a deep sense of shame and responsibility. How could a supposedly Christian nation allow this to happen? The event becomes a catalyst, transforming him from a quiet pastor into a public voice of dissent. The very next day, he ascends his pulpit and does the unthinkable. In a city saturated with Nazi propaganda and ruled by fear, he publicly prays for the Jews. He calls them his persecuted brothers and sisters, declaring that their synagogue was also a house of God. It is an act of breathtaking courage, a direct challenge to the authority of the state. He knows the Gestapo are watching, that his words are being recorded, but he is compelled by a conviction that is stronger than his fear. This single act marks the beginning of a clandestine resistance, a moral awakening that will ripple through the darkest corners of the Reich. Kristallnacht drew a line in the sand, forcing individuals to choose a side. For the few who chose defiance, the path ahead would be fraught with danger, a journey into the shadows where faith would be tested, and survival would depend on secrecy and courage. In the heart of the Third Reich, Berlin was the nerve center of Nazi power, a city of stone eagles, swastika banners, and ever-present surveillance. Here, dissent was not just dangerous, it was suicidal. Yet from the pulpit of St. Hedwig's Cathedral, a stone's throw from the grand monuments of the regime, the voice of Father Bernhard Lichtenberg rose in defiance. After his public prayer for the Jews following Kristallnacht, he did not retreat into silence. Instead, he escalated his quiet war against inhumanity. Every evening, he held a prayer service for the persecuted, a simple yet profound act of solidarity that drew the unwavering attention of the Gestapo. Their agents would sit in the pews, their faces grim, taking meticulous notes on every word he spoke. Lichtenberg was undeterred. He declared from the pulpit that he could not approve of the persecution and encouraged his congregation to follow the commandment to love thy neighbor. His sermons were a masterclass in coded resistance, speaking of justice, compassion, and the sanctity of all human life in a way that directly contradicted Nazi ideology without always giving them clear grounds for arrest. But his work went far beyond public prayer. Lichtenberg became a central figure in a clandestine church aid operation. His office at the cathedral became a place of last resort for desperate Jewish families. They came to him seeking help with emigration, food, or a place to hide. He worked tirelessly, using his connections and the limited resources of his parish to provide what he could. This was not a large-scale, organized resistance movement. It was a deeply personal, case-by-case effort. It was a whispered conversation in a back room, a loaf of bread passed in secret, a contact's name scribbled on a piece of paper. The risk was enormous. Every person he helped, every parishioner he trusted, was a potential link in a chain that could lead the Gestapo to his door. He was under constant surveillance. His mail was opened, his phone was tapped, and informants were placed within his congregation. He knew that every day could be his last day of freedom. In 1941, he wrote a sermon protesting the euthanasia program, the so-called mercy killing of disabled people, another of the Nazis' horrific policies. Before he could deliver it, the Gestapo finally moved in. They arrested him, charging him with treasonous behavior and misuse of the pulpit. During his interrogation, he remained steadfast, stating that he saw it as his duty as a priest to oppose the state's anti-Semitic policies. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but his sentence was a prelude to something far worse. Upon his release, he was immediately rearrested by the Gestapo and ordered to be sent to the Dachau concentration camp. Father Bernhard Lichtenberg, the defiant voice of Berlin, would never reach it. He died on the journey, his health broken by his imprisonment, a martyr to his conscience. As the war machine rolled across Europe, Rome found itself in a precarious position. The Eternal City, home of the Vatican, was officially an open city. But after the fall of Mussolini in 1943, it came under brutal German occupation. The SS, led by the infamous Herbert Kappler, began rounding up Rome's Jewish population. The raid on the Roman ghetto on October 16, 1943, was a scene of terror. Over 1,000 people were arrested and sent directly to Auschwitz. In this atmosphere of fear and betrayal, another German priest, Father Pancratius Pfeffer, became a beacon of hope. Known as the Angel of Rome, Pfeffer was a Salvatorian priest who had lived in the city for decades and served as a crucial, albeit unofficial, liaison between Pope Pius XII and the German military authorities. His position was unique and incredibly powerful. He was German, which gave him a degree of access and a veneer of credibility with the occupiers. He had deep connections within the Vatican, and he possessed a quiet, unassuming demeanor that masked an iron will and a brilliant strategic mind. When the Nazi raids began, Pfeffer transformed his network of contacts into a sophisticated rescue operation. He worked out of his office near St. Peter's Square, a hub of clandestine activity. He used his influence to secure safe houses, hiding Jews, political refugees, and Allied soldiers in monasteries, convents, and private homes across the city. His German was a key weapon. He could speak directly to high-ranking German officers, including General Rainer Stahel, the military commandant of Rome. He would often arrive at SS headquarters, a lone priest in a black cassock, to personally petition for the release of prisoners. He would argue, cajole, and sometimes even bluff, using his knowledge of German bureaucracy and his reputation to his advantage. There are accounts of him walking into prisons with release orders that were of dubious authenticity, his sheer confidence and calm demeanor convincing the guards to comply. He was a master of navigating the treacherous gray areas of occupied Rome. The scale of his operation was staggering. It is estimated that Father Pfeiffer was directly or indirectly involved in saving some 65,000 people. He created a parallel world of safety within the occupied city, a network that relied on trust, secrecy, and the courage of countless ordinary people who opened their doors to strangers. He was playing a deadly game. One mistake, one betrayal, and the entire network could collapse, resulting in the deaths of thousands. Yet day after day, he continued his work, driven by a simple moral imperative. He saw people in need, and he used every tool at his disposal to help them. His story is a testament to the power of one individual using their unique position and connections to create a shield against tyranny. The Warsaw Ghetto was hell on earth. By 1941, nearly 500,000 Jews were sealed behind its high walls, crammed into a squalid, disease-ridden area of just over 1 square mile. Starvation was rampant, typhus was endemic, and the ever-present threat of deportation to the death camps hung over every resident. On the Aryan side of the wall stood All Saints' Church, a parish that now found itself on the front line of the Holocaust. Its priest was Father Marceli Godlewski. His story is one of the most remarkable and complex of the entire war, a narrative of profound personal transformation. Before the war, Godlewski was known for his strong Polish nationalism and held anti-Semitic views, a prejudice that was unfortunately common at the time. He had published writings that were critical of Jewish influence in Poland. But when the ghetto walls went up, enclosing his church within their boundaries, he was confronted with a human catastrophe that transcended his previous beliefs. He saw the suffering up close, the starving children, the bodies lying in the street, the daily roundups by the SS. The reality of the Nazis' genocidal project was laid bare before him, and it changed him completely. The man who had once harbored prejudice became a fearless rescuer. He turned his presbytery and private residence into a sanctuary, hiding hundreds of Jews. He organized a clandestine operation to provide food, medicine, and shelter. His church became a hub for the Catholic relief organization Caritas, distributing aid within the ghetto. Most significantly, Godlewski became a key partner for Irena Sendler, the legendary social worker who ran a network to smuggle Jewish children to safety. Godlewski's role was crucial. He issued false baptismal certificates, creating new identities for Jewish children and adults. These documents were essential for their survival on the Aryan side, providing a plausible cover story that could withstand scrutiny from the Gestapo or Polish collaborators. All Saints' Church became a way station, a temporary haven where people could be hidden before being moved to safer locations. Godlewski's actions were an open secret within the ghetto, a source of hope in a place defined by despair. He worked tirelessly, his pre-war prejudices burned away by the horrors he witnessed. His transformation from an anti-Semite to a rescuer, honored as righteous among the nations, is a powerful story of moral courage. It demonstrates that confrontation with profound evil can inspire an equally profound change of heart. He risked everything, not for a political ideology or a grand strategy, but for the simple, human act of saving his neighbors from annihilation. Across occupied Europe, as the Nazi net tightened, ancient churches became the last bastions of hope. These buildings of stone and faith were transformed into clandestine sanctuaries, their sacred spaces repurposed for the desperate act of survival. This was a secret war fought not with guns, but with silence, ingenuity, and the complicity of a trusted few. The architecture of the church itself became a tactical advantage. Every hidden corner, every forgotten space, was a potential hiding place. Dark, dusty attics above vaulted ceilings, where the only sounds were the creaking of old timbers and the cooing of pigeons, concealed families huddled together for warmth. Damp, cold cellars beneath the flagstones, originally used for storing wine or forgotten relics, became cramped living quarters. The choir loft, offering a high vantage point, could be used to watch for approaching danger. Even the vestries, where priests prepared for Mass, were used to hide people in plain sight for short periods. Survival in these conditions was a logistical nightmare. It depended on a meticulously organized, yet completely invisible support system. Food and water had to be smuggled in, usually under the cover of darkness. This was often the job of the priest himself, or a handful of utterly reliable parishioners, a baker who could spare a loaf of bread, a farmer with a few extra potatoes. The risk of discovery was constant. A single misplaced word, a curious neighbor, or a sudden Gestapo raid could mean death for everyone involved. The logistics of waste disposal were a grim and constant challenge. Every trace of human presence had to be concealed. Sound was the enemy. A child's cry, a cough, or even a floorboard creaking at the wrong time could betray the secret. Those in hiding lived in a state of enforced silence, communicating in whispers, their movements restricted to the dead of night. They were ghosts within the house of God, their existence known only to their saviors. The psychological toll was immense, a combination of claustrophobia, boredom, and sheer terror. The sanctuary was both a refuge and a prison. The complicity of the community was paramount. The priest could not act alone. He needed the tacit support of his sacristan, his organist, or the old woman who cleaned the church. These were not grand pronouncements of resistance, but small, silent acts of collusion. A knowing glance, a question left unasked, a door left unlocked at a specific time. Each person in the chain understood the stakes. If they were caught, they would face not only their own execution, but also brutal reprisals against their families and the entire congregation. Yet they did it anyway, turning their places of worship into operational hubs of a secret, life-saving network. For the priests who chose the path of defiance, the risks were absolute. They were not fighting a distant enemy on a foreign battlefield. They were waging a covert war in their own communities, surrounded by informants and under the constant watch of the Gestapo. Discovery did not mean a fair trial or a prisoner of war camp. It meant interrogation, torture, and almost certain death. The price of their courage was martyrdom. Father Bernhard Lichtenberg's fate is a stark example of the Nazi regime's intolerance for dissent. His arrest was inevitable. After years of public prayer and clandestine aid, the Gestapo had built a comprehensive file against him. His trial was a sham, a piece of political theater designed to intimidate others who might consider following his example. He was accused of treacherous remarks and endangering the war effort. His defense was his faith. He told the court that his conscience as a Christian priest compelled him to speak for the persecuted. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Sentenced to 2 years, he endured the harsh conditions of a Nazi prison. But his punishment was not over. As his release date neared, the Gestapo was waiting. They informed him he would not be freed but would be transported directly to the Dachau concentration camp. The journey itself became his final ordeal. In a sealed cattle car with little food or water, his health, already fragile from imprisonment, gave way. Father Lichtenberg died on November 5, 1943, a martyr who refused to be silenced. His death sent a chilling message to the clergy across Germany. This is the price of defiance. The priests were not the only ones at risk. Their actions placed their entire congregations in mortal danger. If a church was discovered to be hiding Jews, the Nazis would enact brutal reprisals. The priest would be executed, but so would any parishioners known to be involved. The church itself might be closed or even destroyed. The community could be subjected to mass arrests and collective punishment. This terrible burden weighed heavily on the rescuers. They knew that their personal act of conscience could bring ruin upon the people they were sworn to protect. It was a constant, agonizing calculation. Every person they saved increased the risk to everyone else. This is why the complicity of trusted parishioners was so vital and so brave. The baker who provided bread, the woman who sewed clothes, the man who stood as a lookout, they were all signing their own death warrants. They were ordinary people who, when faced with an extraordinary moral choice, chose to share the burden of risk. Their courage, often unrecorded and uncelebrated, was the silent scaffolding that supported the entire rescue network. To fully appreciate the heroism of men like Lichtenberg, Pfeiffer, and Godlewski, we must place their actions in their proper and often troubling historical context. These priests were not the norm, they were the exception. The broader institutional response of the Christian churches in Germany to the rise of Nazism and the Holocaust was one of profound failure. While a small minority resisted, the majority remained silent, and a significant number were complicit. The German Christian movement within the Protestant Church actively sought to align Christianity with Nazi ideology, creating a Nazified version of the faith that embraced racial purity and loyalty to the Führer. In the Catholic Church, the 1933 Concordat with the Nazi regime created a framework for non-interference. Many bishops and priests saw communism as the greater threat and viewed the Nazi Party as a bulwark against it. This led to a policy of appeasement and public silence on the regime's atrocities, particularly the persecution of the Jews. The institutional church as a whole chose to protect its own organization, its schools, and its property, rather than speak out for the most vulnerable. This silence had devastating consequences. The lack of a unified public condemnation from Germany's religious leaders gave the Nazi regime a veneer of moral legitimacy. It allowed ordinary Germans to believe that supporting the government, or at least not opposing it, was acceptable. Perhaps the most damning aspect of this complicity was the cooperation of local parishes in the regime's racial policies. For generations, churches had kept detailed baptismal and marriage records. When the Nazis passed the Nuremberg laws in 1935, they needed a way to trace Jewish ancestry. They turned to the churches, and in most cases the churches complied. Parish priests, following orders from their superiors, opened their archives. These sacred records were weaponized. They provided the genealogical proof the Nazis needed to identify, categorize, and ultimately murder millions of people. A document that once celebrated a new life in the church became a death warrant. This difficult truth does not diminish the courage of the rescuers. It amplifies it. The priests who hid Jews were acting in defiance not only of the Nazi state, but often of the prevailing culture within their own church. They were isolated figures, operating on the fringes, guided by their individual conscience rather than institutional directive. Their bravery shines all the brighter against the dark backdrop of widespread silence and collaboration. They understood what their leaders did not, that a church that saves its buildings but loses its soul has saved nothing at all. Behind the statistics and historical accounts lies the raw, human reality of what it meant to be hidden. For every priest who risked his life, there were men, women, and children whose survival depended entirely on that courage. Their experience was one of constant, gnawing fear, punctuated by moments of profound humanity. Imagine being a child, torn from your home and thrust into a world of shadows and whispers. Your new home is a cold, cramped attic or a damp cellar. You cannot run, you cannot play, you cannot cry out loud. Your parents, their faces etched with terror, constantly remind you to be silent. The smallest noise could bring death to the door. The world shrinks to the size of a few dusty square feet. Daylight is the enemy, a source of potential discovery. Night is a time of both terror and relief. It brings the creeping fear of a Gestapo raid, the sound of heavy boots on the cobblestones below. But it also brings the quiet footsteps of the priest, a dark figure arriving with a small parcel of food, a whispered word of encouragement, or news from the outside world. This person, a stranger, is your lifeline. Their presence is a brief flicker of hope in an endless darkness. The relationship between the hider and the hidden was complex and intense. It was a bond forged in shared peril, a complete dependence of one human being on another. The rescued were not passive recipients of aid. They had to be active participants in their own survival, adhering to a rigid discipline of silence and invisibility. The psychological strain was immense. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The lack of fresh air, the poor nutrition, and the constant anxiety took a heavy toll on both physical and mental health. Yet, amid the suffering, there were moments of grace. The simple act of a priest sharing his meager rations, reading a passage from a book, or simply sitting in silence with a family was an affirmation of their humanity in a world that was trying to erase it. The numbers are a testament to the impact of these operations. Father Pancratius Pfeffer is credited with saving as many as 65 people in Rome. Father Marceli Godlewski helped hundreds escape the Warsaw Ghetto. While Father Lichtenberg's aid network was smaller and more localized, every single life he touched was a victory against the machinery of death. These were not just numbers. They were futures that were not extinguished, families that were not erased, and legacies that were allowed to continue. The human cost of the Holocaust is immeasurable, but the value of each life saved is infinite. In the decades following the end of World War II, as the world grappled with the scale of the Holocaust, a new imperative emerged: to remember not only the victims and the perpetrators, but also the rare individuals who risked everything to help. In 1953, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Authority, Yad Vashem, established a special designation to honor these heroes, righteous among the nations. This title is bestowed upon non-Jews who, at great personal risk, saved Jews during the Holocaust. It is Israel's highest civil honor and a profound recognition of moral courage. Over the years, the stories of the rescuer priests began to surface, pieced together from survivor testimonies, church archives, and historical research. One by one, their sacrifices were formally recognized. Father Bernhard Lichtenberg, the defiant dean of Berlin Cathedral, was honored by Yad Vashem. His public prayers and his martyrdom stood as a powerful symbol of spiritual resistance in the Nazi capital. Father Pancratius Pfeffer, the Angel of Rome, was also named righteous among the nations for his sophisticated and large-scale rescue operations. And Father Marceli Godlewski, the priest of All Saints Church in the Warsaw Ghetto, received the honor, a testament to his extraordinary personal transformation from a man of prejudice to a heroic savior. This recognition is more than just a posthumous award. It serves a crucial historical purpose. It codifies their legacy, ensuring that their names and their deeds are not forgotten. It provides a vital counter-narrative to the story of indifference and complicity. In a history dominated by darkness, the stories of the righteous are points of light, evidence that even in the worst of times, individuals have the capacity to choose good over evil. The legacy of these priests is multifaceted. They are remembered as martyrs by the Catholic Church, with Lichtenberg even being beatified by Pope John Paul II. But their legacy transcends any single institution. They stand as universal symbols of acting on one's conscience, even when it means standing alone against the state, against society, and sometimes even against one's own religious institution. Their moral transformation is perhaps their most powerful lesson. Many, like Godlewski, were not saints or lifelong humanitarians. They were flawed human beings who, when confronted with an absolute evil, rose to the occasion and discovered a depth of courage they may not have known they possessed. Their stories challenge us to ask what we would have done in their place. They remind us that history is not just made by armies and politicians, but by the individual moral choices of ordinary people. Thank you for joining WWII Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, We honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.